Well, the southern border is essentially locked down, so that's forcing these cartel organizations, these smugglers, back to the seas. But U.S. Customs and Border Protection, they're more prepared now. They have a lot of federal partners down here working with them, and if you don't stop, when they try to pursue you, they'll make you.
So gangs and smugglers are now taking to the seas in an effort to evade capture at the U.S. border. But they've got a problem in the past. These guys could just drive their boats right onto our shores and get out. However, today, the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard are lying in wait with drones, ships, and aircraft. And if they see smugglers, they are gonna shut them down.
But now that land crossings are becoming more difficult, smugglers are moving out to sea.
They've already had 350 different incidents where they've had to shoot out the engines of these smuggling vessels. They do have a protocol. They try to get these individuals to stop first. If they don't, then they fire warning shots. If they still won't stop, then yeah, that's when they quite literally bring in the big guns. They have to shoot out these engines.
The area of operation vast.
There's still a lot of water, and it can be very difficult to identify vessels.
Right there, you can see the beginning of the border wall between the U.S. and Mexico. You can see it jutting out into the ocean.
Terradynamics just announced a $4.6 million contract expansion with the U.S. Navy to develop a fleet of these unmanned drones. When a battleship, aircraft carrier, or other vessel is deep out at sea, it can be costly and dangerous to use pilots to transport necessary equipment back and forth. Enter the XP-4, which can be used to shuttle that gear for a fraction of the price without putting sailors in danger.
So Border Patrol and the Coast Guard are seeing surging recruitment numbers. But what nobody's talking about is that while the game plan to protect our borders may have changed, those trying to exploit it and work their way around our troops have not. And many of these smugglers taking to the seas have done this before. After all, they're part of a $13 billion per year industry, and many of the thugs driving boats and various watercraft have a history with U.S. law enforcement. And before you start thinking the drones, helicopters, and even the U.S. naval warships off our shores are overkill, it's important to understand that they're there to stop some of the most dangerous criminals on our entire planet, who, whether it's at sea or on land, will do everything they can to evade law enforcement and are willing to use force if necessary, which is why the good guys have to be ready to stop them quickly and safely so nobody gets hurt, and so the criminal empires profiting off our formerly open border stop growing and shut down permanently. Which brings us to the real reason we're even still having this problem. Many critics suspect that these cartels and these gangs have infested the Mexican government to such an extent that wiping them off the map for good is proving to be a challenge. Not because America doesn't have the technology or the capability to do it, but because it is alleged that our southern neighbor Mexico is actively protecting these guys, allowing them to stay one step ahead of efforts to control and end their operations, even going so far as to reject the idea of a U.S. military operation on Mexican soil, which would shut these cartels down for good. And since these guys are now hiding in an area the U.S. military can't get to, they can continually launch boats and water-based incursions toward our shores, which result in daring sea-based operations like this.
Marine interdiction agents, they were actually forced to disable a vessel after it blew past Mexican Navy and U.S. Coast Guard. They refused to stop, and one of the agents actually had to shoot out one of the engines of the boat, which is actually very small and underwater.
That was a police chase on the water. You had the Coast Guard vessel literally trying to do a pit maneuver on the smugglers' craft. The same thing that happens with smugglers on the highways of America. And as you're about to see, because operations like this risk the lives of everyone involved, the U.S. is ramping up efforts to make sure they stop happening, even without the help of Mexico.
We're locked arms, and we have interleaving authorities with the Coast Guard. We have basically the same authorities as Border Patrol. We just kind of translate them to the maritime environment. But we're locked arms. You're not getting by us.
Okay, so Blake, they've already had 350 different incidents where they've had to shoot out the engines of these smuggling vessels. They do have a protocol. They try to get these individuals to stop first. If they don't, then they fire warning shots. If they still won't stop, then yeah, that's when they quite literally bring in the big guns. They have to shoot out these engines to disable them. The good news here, though, Blake, out of 350 incidents that they've recorded, 0 injuries. They're already at 7.
350 recorded incidents, that's a lot, but the good news is nobody's gotten hurt in spite of how dangerous that might be. That right there is a success story. But it also reveals just how expensive and time-consuming it is to properly police our borders, to send highly trained experts out there to end things in the most peaceful way possible. And these guys aren't out there alone. They need technology, they need training, and they need eyes and ears all over the place to make sure that they know who's who and who's where and where they're headed, which is why our boys at sea are about to get something new to help them.
I just want to show it to you first and foremost. This is the format for when it looks like when it's taking off
That's
and landing.
crazy.
You can see the wings actually folded up, very similar to what a helicopter might do when it takes off and lands. But it only takes less than 10 seconds for those wings to unfold. Nicole, look at this. Looks like a regular airplane, right? This is what allows it to actually glide through the air for miles at a time.
Huh, kind of like the drones that were gliding through the air miles at a time over certain parts of America. But although this is probably a completely different piece of equipment, it's going to do a lot to help our maritime warriors stay out there longer and stop more people from coming across trying to break our laws and get into our country. These things can transport objects between locations, including supplies, and they can carry rescue equipment like life rafts to save people whose boat starts to sink before a ship is in range to pick them up. And since these things have incredible endurance, their ability to loiter in the sky will act as a visible deterrent for criminals who think they're in the clear.
When a battleship, aircraft carrier, or other vessel is deep out at sea, it can be costly and dangerous to use pilots to transport necessary equipment back and forth. Enter the XP-4, which can be used to shuttle that gear for a fraction of the price without putting sailors in danger.
Right away you see it's a very small operating ground footprint.
The CEO also envisions a future where the drone is used to deliver medicine to remote locations or carry out covert recon missions,
where you can truly go bring.
So what most people don't understand is that the battle over border security is actually a battle over dollars and cents. And with naval destroyers like this being sent to the southern border, they require a lot of upkeep. These things are just around the clock maintenance operation in many cases. But we need the Navy off our coasts to stop people who think they can just come across whenever they want. But here's the thing, these cartels, they know each president only has 4 years to take them out. And if they can outlast a president or the resources they've got to combat them, perhaps by just lying low for the time being, in the future they'll be able to come back stronger. Especially since they seem to be benefiting from the help of the Mexican government, even if it's unintentional, which it certainly might not be.
Mexico is essentially controlled by these criminal organizations. So this week we heard from Trump's pick to be the head of the DEA, Terrence Cole. He said this in front of a Senate Judiciary Committee that he believes the majority of Mexico is governed by the cartels. Take a listen.
We've seen traditionally the military working hand in hand. We've seen police officers working hand in hand with cartel members. I saw the cartel's coercion of government institutions, intimidation of law enforcement, and their brutal enforcement of control over entire communities.
These cartels, they transcend politics, because no matter who's in charge of Mexico, if they're embedded everywhere throughout all levels of government, in the military, in the police, they're gonna find people who they can work with to stay one step ahead of any effort to take them out. There's always a politician out there who's corrupt that they can pay off, or they could pay off that politician's underlings to sabotage their efforts. And the way they look at the country of Mexico is they see the entire place as being for sale. And since they've got plenty of money from their illegal operations that they make across the US border, they probably aren't gonna run out of resources to continue negatively influencing our southern neighbor anytime soon. Unless US border efforts keep going the way they have, which is causing chaos for these criminals.
Now, Mexico's president, Claudia Sheinbaum, she regularly refutes these claims. She points the finger back to the United States, saying, start with your own country first. Now, when we talked with Border Patrol about trust with Mexico, they have told us that the trust is there, but when the cameras aren't on and I'm talking with sources, they often tell me that Mexico is actually part of the problem and they don't do enough on the south side of the border. So one example of that is when Mexico was saying, hey, we're doing what we can. We're offering them places to live and to stay. stay here in Mexico instead of going all the way to the U.S. border. But, Nicole, I actually have gotten some documents along the southern border that show that they're only marked 40 to 45 days, and they're clearly marked transit. So it's essentially a fast pass to get them through every checkpoint and right to our back door. So if this is Mexico helping and providing a place to live and work, you can see why those comments made by the DEA saying that there's some control there by the cartels. You can see there's some validity with that, Nicole.
So Mexico blames America for the strength of these cartels and the fact that they even exist. And they're saying, hey, America, this is your problem. Go and fix it. But then a report like this comes out that shows that the Mexican government may be facilitating the movement of these very criminals to help them do their thing. And now we have evidence that the Mexican government is allowing these guys to move through their territory with official paperwork and documents, something that's surely not shutting them down so much as it's helping them. Also, whenever you see Mexican troops patrolling the border or conducting crackdowns, there's a very good chance the gang members and cartels already knew those crackdowns were coming and see them as a cost of doing business.
Chief Attila, good morning to you. I mean, could you imagine if the U.S. military was allowed to go into Mexico and take out these cartels? We could do it, and the reign of terror would be over. Mexico and the United States would be safer as a result of this. But the president of Mexico turned President Trump down. What's your reaction to this?
Well, you're right. There's a lot of potential here. We share so many things besides the border with Mexico, right? Family, tourism, lots of trade. And we also are fearful of the cartels that are operating in Mexico. We know that Mexico is very concerned about their influence in their society today. And so this is a potential partnership that could pay dividends for generations. And so I understand where the president is coming from.
It would pay dividends for generations of Mexicans and Americans who obey the law and just want to live and pursue happiness to the best of their ability. And the fact that the Mexican president has said troops cannot come in and cannot do their job and cannot help Mexico retake their country, that's telling. Because the presence of these criminals does not help the common people anywhere. It only benefits corrupt elites and politicians. Now, maybe this is intentional. Maybe the president of Mexico is in league with these criminals directly, or perhaps her advisors and her military is. But one thing's for sure, if U.S. tanks rolled across that border, it would look like the country of Mexico has completely collapsed and is totally unable to run itself.
These are her words. She said, we can collaborate, we can work together, but you and your territory, we and ours, we can share information, but we will never accept the presence of the U.S. Army in our territory.
Mexico is doing a lot. They do have 10,000 National Guard troops on the northern border. They've never done anything like that before. They really leaned in under the threat of tariffs to make sure that they were working. Kristi Noem, the Secretary of DHS, has spoken directly with the Mexican president to make sure that they're keeping up their end of the bargain as it relates to our shared responsibility on the border. But
okay, now, knowing what we just heard about how these cartels operate and how they've infested the military and the police and the government, you got to ask yourself, what good are 10,000 compromised troops going to actually do at the U.S. border? Are those troops just placed there by Mexico so that it can look like something is going to happen? Sure, they might make arrests here and there. They might get a few low-level criminals, but the big guys that are controlling operations within Mexico, are we really supposed to believe, in light of these reports, that they don't know what these troops are and are not allowed to do? And part of what makes this incredibly apparent is that right on the other side of the border wall, in some cases, you can see equipment and things that these gang members have set up that they think is going to help their operation. And it's like right on the other side of the wall. It's within almost touching distance, but there's nothing our troops can do.
This is the reality of the evil that we're facing.
Cartels light candles to the so-called Lady of Holy Death, believing she grants protection.
When the reality is that is demonic, is just pure evil.
Cartels still dominate Mexico's border regions, especially in Juarez, where agents found 281 stash houses last year.
They control it 100%, contrary to what the media may say or what anything. You're not going through those areas unless you're on that cartel.
Through the border fence, we can see this little cabinet with a hat and a lock on it, full of religious artifacts that these guys think are gonna help them make it across the border successfully. And it's right there. Why is this thing locked if nobody's walking up to it and unlocking it ever to use all the stuff in there? And several news reports have mentioned that the religious looking things in here are used by these gang members to perform little ceremonies before they try and cross the border. That's why these things are so close to the border itself. And the fact that this stuff is right here and accessible tells you who might really be in control of the Mexican side of the border.
Once crowded migrant trails now sit empty.
It is very gratifying for us to see the actual results of having consequences and having a government that is for the safety and for the well-being of our communities.
So those consequences at the border, they're not coming from the Mexican side of the border. They're coming from the U.S. side. They're coming from this massive crackdown that's happening in terms of border security, which has never happened before, and that's shutting down areas of the border on the Mexican side. The U.S. crackdown is making Mexico safer, but that also explains why now sea-based crossings and incursions are becoming more common. What do you think about that? Will there be more sea-based incursions in the near future? There's a lot of water out there. How would the U.S. go about securing all of it, or is it even going to be possible to do that without the help of Mexico? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.